everyone for being here. It's nice to see a full house. So, Ira, it's not very usual. Sorry. So, consider yourself fortunate. But I think it's the draw of the book and the draw of the author. I have to tell you, it's a marvelous book. I've read all of Ira's books, but she really does top herself in this. The problem is there's so much to talk about. So I don't know what we're going to end up focusing on. There's the British, the East India Company, who she, of course, says has great PR. And it opens with a very striking image of these plumes of smoke rising up in 1947 as the partition is happening. And what's happening there is that the British are actually burning documents. They're burning documents that could portray them in a negative light. They're burning documents that could tell the world exactly how evil and diabolical they were, so that future generations would consider British rule to be one of the greatest gifts that colonialists could give to anyone in the world. Then there's the French, who are, somewhere around there as mercenaries with their own imperial dreams and a lot of hot romances with a lot of Indian women as well. Yeah. Then there is Delhi, which is in decline. Not the current Delhi, which is also in decline, but this is the Delhi in decline. And there's a lovely couplet there of Mir Taki Mir, which I want to just quickly read to you so that you know how history is so cyclical, which is every day there is a new master of the world. Is power a beggar going from door to door? Which is really the decline of Delhi, which power going from door to door is something we can relate with now as well. Then there's also the rise of Faizabad and Lucknow at around the same time. And I think this is material that has really not seen the light of day. And we have two very prominent Lucknowi people in the audience, whereas Amrit Kiran Singh and Farah Guest, who have told us quickly about a lot of Lucknow, including the fact that, and Faizabad, including the fact that Begum Akhtar actually was Akhtari by Faizabadi initially.
Yeah.
And then apart from that, there is so much of sex going on.
I wasn't expecting that.
Which I don't know. I mean, everybody's at it, And there are two very, very powerful women, Bahu Begum and Nawabi Begum. So there's so much going on. I don't know where to begin. As you can see, I'm thoroughly confused, but thoroughly delighted by the book. So, Ira, thank you for agreeing to do this. And where shall we begin? Shall we begin with a quick...
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Kaveri. That's really very kind of you. As Kaveri was saying, there's so much in this book that sometimes I get lost and I forget what I've written. And I'm like, oh my God, what did I say about this character? So I thought I'd give you all a short overview, sharing some of the materials that I've sourced from various archives around the world. I was very lucky to find some materials which have never been seen before outside of those countries because they're not digitized. So, many Indian scholars are not able to get to them. And I thought this would be a good opportunity to share some of that with you. So I'll take you through a few slides and give you just a brief overview of what I'm trying to accomplish in the book without going into too many details, which we can do later with Kaveri. I'm very nervous about the fact that there are some Lucknowis in the audience. So far, these are
you should be nervous about the Lamartine area.
Oh, yeah.
We'll come to that.
Yes. Okay, so this is the only slide which is going to have writing on it like this. Please don't worry. The others are all images. This is really to let you know that, there are many threads running through my book because the 18th century is an extremely complicated time in India. So all kinds of things are happening. A lot of what we were told, any case about the 18th century is untrue. Things like the collapse of Delhi leading to a slow decrepitude of Indian culture, thereby waiting for the British savior to come and, save India. That's really completely untrue. While Delhi certainly did come under assault, the so-called sub-imperial centers were rising up. All the other areas with Nawabs and kings were, spending money on their culture, on their art, on their architecture. So there were many other centers of creativity coming up. But one particular thread that really runs through the 18th century and which affects Indian history in a very, very strong way, both at the global level and in certain individual occurrences which happen, are the great Anglo-French wars of the 18th century. Now, today we've forgotten all about that, except when Brexit suddenly, rears its ugly head and we wonder what's happening. But even Brexit has its origins on these kind of wars. So at the beginning of the 18th century, England was this tiny island with a very small population, whereas France was the big, huge continental country with a large land army, a big population, a very vibrant economy. England was really a very, very tiny, poor Protestant cousin in the margins. But through the 18th century, there were these various wars which basically pitted France and its allies against Britain and its allies. And each time they had a huge repercussion on what was happening in India, because both these countries, England and France, started building their global empires at this time. So whether it is the first Austrian War of Succession, which led to England capturing all of France's factories in India, to the 7 Years' War, which ended up in a pretty brutal way for France because they lost a lot of their international colonies and they had to sign a peace. So in the mid 18th century, France was basically on a losing wicket in India. But instead of just saying, okay, we are leaving the country, they started what they called a guerre de revanche, which is a war of revenge to try and get back their possessions or to block British imperial ambitions. And then you have the American Revolutionary Wars, which the French joined in on the side of the Americans and defeated the British. This was a really important war, which we really don't talk about here in India because it really doesn't seem to mean anything to us. But it has a huge repercussion because the Brits are completely shaken by the loss of the American colonies. They had 13 colonies in America. Losing them meant losing all that wealth and all that prestige. And that makes them all the more determined to hold on to their Indian territories at whatever cost. And individually, it means that personalities like Governor General Cornwallis, who was the losing general on the side of the British in America, he actually has to surrender officially to Washington. And I think that is psychologically so damaging for him. Then when he comes to India, he enacts all kinds of very racist laws saying that Anglo-Indians will never be allowed to rise in service. He is absolutely paranoid about the rise of local settlers because that's who threw them out of America. So he comes and enacts all these laws, which to us can seem problematic and bizarre, but they make sense if you tie it back to the way in which they lost America. And then you have the French Revolution, of course, with all its consequences, especially vis-a-vis Tipu Sultan, because my book does touch on Tipu Sultan because there's the strongest presence amongst all the Indian rulers in the 18th century. No one had any idea of what was going on here. No one had any concept of the Anglo-French rivalries. A lot of Indian rulers thought that all Firangis were the same. They were vaguely sweaty and pale and wore hats, and that was about it. So it drove the French really irritated when they found out that they couldn't be distinguished from their British counterparts. But Tipu Sultan and Hyder Ali before him really knew what was happening in Europe and used France, to expand their military, to refine their technology. And because of that, the British used that as an excuse to really destroy Tipu Sultan. So having given you just this overview, let me see if I've understood this. Okay, this is just to show you the main players in the book. So in the middle, you have this magnificent painting by Tilly Kettle, who was the first British artist, the first European artist, in fact, to come to India, to the Nawab's court, and he painted a series of very influential paintings of the Nawab. So that on the right of the little middle circle is Nawab Shujauddaulah, and standing next to him, looking a little perplexed and looking up at him in amazement, is his son and heir, Asaf-ud-Daulah, who would reign after him. And around the Nawab is the series of some slightly loose characters, who sort of just gravitate around the great power and wealth of the Nawabs, looking for ways to just advance, advance themselves. So at the top is Jean-Baptiste Gentil, whom we'll be talking about a little bit. And then you have some characters that you may be familiar with. There's Claude Martin. On the left is Antoine Collier, who was a French origin man, but who subsequently fought for the British. Then you have Benoit de Coigne, who fought for the Marathas after passing through Lucknow. So this is to show you really that ideas of identity and belonging and nationality in the 18th century was in a state of flux. It wasn't so clear as it is today. You're not born in a certain country, you speak a certain language, you have a certain religion, therefore you owe allegiance to that country. So for example, Claude Martin, who was completely a Frenchman. He spoke French all his life, spoke very broken English. Yet the minute he came to India as a very young man, he was caught up in the battles in which the French factories were defeated in Pondicherry, and he immediately defected to the British, seeing on which side his bread was buttered, and spent the rest of his career basically toning up to the British and trying to get a better advancement with them, even though he was a French Catholic. On the other hand, you have Antoine Collier, was also a French-speaking man, but he was a Protestant from present-day Switzerland, which was at that time Lausanne. And because he was a Protestant and he had a skill with languages, he was able to go over to the British and say, listen, I speak English, I'm a Protestant like you, I would rather be on your side. And he was able to do that, though he didn't advance very far. So this is to show you the sort of nebulous kind of character of the people who are involved. Nothing was very black and white. So this is a painting which shows the Battle of Buxar, or rather the post-Battle of Buxar, signing of the Diwani by Shah Alam II, because I find that it's a really important moment in 18th century. A lot of the time we are told that the Battle of Plassey was the really important one, but really that was just a sleight of hand by Robert Clive. He just toppled Siraj-ud-Dowla, and nothing much happened after that, apart from, of course, 75 ships filled with silver. But apart from that small matter, this is the battle that changed a lot for the British, because after Plassey, the Mughal Emperor Shah Alam II, who we see in the center, decides that he has to do something to get some money back into the treasury, because by this time in the 1760s, Nadir Shah had come and gone. And following those devastating battles and a conquest by Nadir Shah and the Afghans, all the local districts, all the subedars, all the governors stopped sending money back to the center at Delhi. They figure that Delhi is now on a losing wicket, and all their treasure is being stolen by the Afghans. So why should they send back treasury back to Delhi? So Shah Alam is in dire need of money at this time, and so he decides to call on his greatest supporters. So there's Mir Qasim of Bengal, who has again been thrown off by the British, and there is Nawab Shuja'ud-Dowla of Awadh, who at this time is the greatest power in Hindustan. Now we forget this today, we don't think much of Awadh in these times, but he was a great military general with a huge army, renowned personally for his bravery, his charisma, the loyalty that he had amongst his followers. So Shuja'ud-Dowla was persuaded to join Shah Alam as well. And they go and they confront the British army, which is a much smaller army, but European trained, as we know famously. Now it was a bitterly fought battle, but in the end, the British won, basically because the Indian side had such a huge unwieldy army which did not communicate with each other, and there was all sorts of chaos. And so in the end, they were defeated. And the terrible consequences was that Robert Clive, who is today recognized as pretty much a psychopath, was around. And he made Shah Alam sign over the Diwani, which is the tax collecting rights for Bengal, the richest province at that time. So this is really a shocking moment for Indian history, and everything about this painting is a lie. It was painted in 1818, long after Robert Clive had committed suicide, died by suicide, long after even Shah Alam had died. And this man, this artist, Benjamin West, had of course never been to India, much less seen Shah Alam II or any of these people. So this is what we were talking about with Kaveri, the sort of aggrandizement that starts happening with the British at this time to sort of put a patina of respectability over what they were doing, which was basically throwing over a ruler who was ruling in his country for no reason but to be able to seize the treasury and the tax collecting rights of that place. But we also have a couple of French characters lurking in the background of this battle, one of whom is this officer, Jean-Baptiste Gentil. Now, he was a French officer who had come and fought some great battles alongside an earlier governor called Dupleix. And he was defeated again when the British were throwing out the French from their factories. And at that point, he came and he joined the Nawab of Awadh, Shuja'ud-Dawla. And he was there at this battle and he helped him after the battle, because what happened is not only did Shah Alam lose Bengal, but Nawab Shuja'ud-Dawla was declared a rebel, and he was told that he could not return to Awadh. So Shuja'ud-Dawla at this point is landless. He has lost his kingdom, he has lost his money, he has lost his fame, his fortune, everything. From being the most famous man in Hindustan, he has become a rebel. And he is in a desperate state. And Jean-Baptiste Gentil tells him, listen, I will broker a peace for you with Robert Clive and the British, and you will get back your lands in Awadh. And that is, in fact, what he does. Oops, sorry, wrong one. Okay. Jean-Baptiste Gentil is also a great patron of art, and he commissions many, many paintings. This in the Mughal miniature style, and it evolves into what later will be called the company style painting, which you will be familiar with. So this is a precursor to that style of painting, but I wanted to show you how over here you can see in the center that he has actually asked his painter to depict these scenes that are happening at the moment. You can see a little figure in blue sort of reaching out to the figure of the Nawab on the horse. And that little figure in blue is actually Jean-Baptiste Gentil, presenting to the Nawab Shuja'ud-Dawla all those French soldiers lined up very smartly on their horses. So he has kind of got together all the French soldiers who had to run away from Pondicherry, run away from Chandanagar, all the factories which have been taken over by the British. Gentil collects all these soldiers and mercenaries together and presents them to the Nawab, who is very happy to take them on because they are well-trained soldiers. And he figures the only way to defeat the British or to keep them at bay is to defeat them with their own techniques. So he takes on all these men, and Gentil is actually able to broker a peace with the British general, General Carnac, and Shuja'ud-Dawla gets back his lands, though he is told he has to pay a very hefty fee of 50 lakhs at that time, which he is able to get from Bahu Begum, his main Begum, and that is the source of her power till the end of her life, because she always tells anybody who wants to listen that the reason the Nawab got back Awadh is because of me, is my dowry, my money, which was mine legitimately. I gave it to the Nawab, therefore Awadh is mine. And she says this till the end of her life to everybody, the British men who try to seize her treasury. She really holds on to this, and she is very clear about it. She's a wonderful person. But another interesting painting that I came across in the V&A from Jean-Baptiste Gentil's album is this magnificent painting. Now, it is showing a Muharram procession. Now, those of you who are familiar, the Nawabs of Awadh were of Persian origin. Their forefather Saadat Khan came from Persia in the early 18th century, and he was a Shia, just like all the Nawabs would be. Now, the Shias in India and in the world are a tiny minority, and they consider themselves a persecuted minority, and often they are not allowed to carry out their commemorations and their rites in an open manner. You know, even under the Mughals, it was said, okay, they were tolerated, but they had to keep it a bit hidden, you know, certainly under Aurangzeb. What we see in this painting is that the Nawab Shuja'ud-Dawla is actually carrying out this ceremony, this procession during Muharram. I won't go into the details of Muharram and the way in which Shiaism differs, except to tell you that the Shias believe that the inheritors of Prophet Muhammad's legacy remains in his bloodlines, i.e. his son-in-law Imam Ali and Imam Ali's sons Hassan and Hussein, and so it should continue in that bloodline. Whereas the Sunnis, believe that it is just the word of God, and so it is an elected caliph who takes on the mantle each time. So they have this procession to mark the martyrdom of Imam Hussein at Karbala, which is a really important occasion for the Shias. And here we can see in this extraordinary painting that this procession is going on for what seems like miles. And they have used this technique, which they are learning clearly from European painters, that they are able to show those figures at the top are shown much smaller. The ones close at the bottom are shown much bigger. So they're able to show depth. So this is one of the first times that you see that they have learned European techniques of showing depth and perspective and are using it to a very Indian, rite and celebration, not celebration, but commemoration, which is taking place. And you can see the little right in the center, there's like a circle of men. That is an elite circle of men, which have the Nawab Shuja-ud-Dawla himself, shouting words of mourning for Imam Hussein. And right closest to us, there are people distributing charity and throwing coins from the elephants and all kinds of symbols. The taziyat, which are an Indian, which originated in India. Those little, can you see those little kind of structures which look like temples or look like maqbaras? Those were started in India to depict the coffins or the biers of Imam Hussein and the various martyrs, and they're taken along in this long procession on the 10th day of Muharram, and they are put into water. And so this is an extraordinary painting which shows that actually Shuja-ud-Dawla is doing something quite unique, which is claiming very openly his identity as a Shia ruler. We had not really seen this before, and it ties in with something that I had read about his encounter with Ahmad Shah Durrani a couple of years before. Now, and he had decided, Shuja-ud-Dawla had decided to fight alongside Ahmad Shah Durrani to fight the Marathas, who were becoming a real menace around Delhi. And the Ahmad Shah Durrani, it was a Sunni, and so in the encampment, it happened to be Muharram, and Nawab Shuja-ud-Dawla and his followers started doing the same procession in a very loud manner in front of Ahmad Shah Durrani's Sunni soldiers, who immediately threatened to beat them up and cut off their heads and send off their heads back to their country. And Ahmad Shah Durrani had to calm them down and say, no, he is our ally, Shia or not, and so we must tolerate him. So this really tied up for me Shuja-ud-Dawla's personality and his determination to be able to create a capital and a place where he would be able to carry out the commemorations of Shiaism in a particular manner. And this to show you just how beautiful these two gems are. Shuja-ud-Dawla on the right with his flamboyant and magnificent moustaches. I think that was one of the reasons for his great success with the ladies. He was known to be a bit of a philanderer, and Bahu Begum had to make him sign a pact whereby he would spend every evening with her, and if he did not, then he had to pay a fine, and she became very rich. So there you have Shuja-ud-Dawla, and you will note that he has a Persian edging to his his coat, and that is again to denote his Persian origin, because it is a Persian style coat with the fur lining on it. Even sometimes he would do the same to his turban and have a little fur lining to his turban. Asaf-ud-Dawla to the left looks a little less statuesque and magnificent, and he was often criticized for being overweight. And I just think he suffered in comparison to his very dashing father. Now, if we come, now I was telling you about this notion we have, and I think is true, about what Shuja-ud-Dawla was trying to do with Shiaism in Awadh. And if we look at this very familiar to all of you, I'm sure, tomb, which is Safdarjung's tomb. Now, Safdarjung was Shuja-ud-Dawla's father. And when Safdarjung died quite suddenly, Shuja-ud-Dawla started building this tomb for him. Now, most of the time you will hear about Safdarjung's tomb as being something of a poor specimen of a Mughal tomb. A poor specimen compared to Humayun's tomb, for example. But if you look at it and see what Shuja-ud-Dawla is trying to do, he has all the elements of great Mughal architecture. So he has a raised plinth. It's, on a platform, a high platform. It's within a charbagh, which is, a typical Mughal imperial style. It has a walled garden. It has a mosque and it has pavilions. It even has those cusped arches and the Joroka window. Now, these are all elements that you see in the Red Fort. You see the Joroka window. You see it in Humayun's tomb. So this is typically Mughal imperial style, but it is being used in a different manner. And the decorations on Safdarjung's tomb, I invite you to go and look at it again. Inside, you will see with stucco, not marble, but with stucco, they have created this sort of exuberant vegetal style with lots of strolling leaves and vines and flowers on the interior. Whereas in Mughal tombs, if you will try to bring to your mind what a Shah Jahani, for example, structure, the Taj Mahal looks like, it is all inlaid Pietra Dura work. So a very flat surface with those very fine, beautiful, pristine flowers. This is something different and unique. It is an exuberance, something absolutely new and creative that is being tried out. And remember that this is actually the first of these monumental tombs, first and last, and as far as I can remember, monumental tombs not built for a Mughal family member. So this is unique in its time, and rather than see it as the remainder of the last sigh of the Mughal grandeur, which is what it is normally described as, it is actually the beginning chant of Nawabi art and architecture, because this style would be carried on in Lucknow, first Faizabad, then Lucknow, and carried to a great height over there. And if you have a look, this is what I wanted to point out, is that if you look at the red circle, so that is the area around Hazrat Nizamuddin's Dargah, because all the great Mughal tombs are built in that area, because the Mughals used Nizamuddin's Dargah as their patron. So they try to be as close to the the presence of this powerful saint as possible. So you have Humayun's tomb right next to the Dargah of Nizamuddin Aulia, as you will, I'm sure, all be familiar with. All the great tombs around there, Abdurrahi, all the other ones are all clustered, Mahamanga's mosque as well. They are all clustered around that red circle. Whereas Safdarjung's tomb, those of you who are familiar, at the end of Lodi Road, in an exact line at the end of Lodi Road, is Safdarjung's tomb, which is within Aliganj, which was the great Shia area of Delhi. It had Shia monuments which belonged to the Nawab. That land belonged to the Nawabs of Awadh. So I think Shuja-ud-Dawla was actually making a clear statement of his intention of creating a new urban spatial identity in Faizabad.
Okay, right.
This is the beginning, because Safdarjung, remember, was a Delhi courtier.
Right.
So it is correct that he be buried here. But from his time onwards, Shuja-ud-Dawla's time onwards, they would all be in Faizabad and Lucknow. So now there is a new player on the scene. The kingmaker is now moving to Awadh. Delhi is no longer, as far as the Awadhis are concerned, the great place of culture and architecture. And what happens after Shuja-ud-Dawla dies, when Asaf-ud-Dawla comes to the throne in 1775, he continues the same style along the same way. So in the 1780s, about 10 years after he takes over, he builds this amazing complex of the Lucknow Imambara next to the Machi Bhawan Palace, the mosque, the Asafi Mosque, all those beautiful gateways which are still there today. If you go the Rumi Darwaza, one of the gateways is destroyed, but the Rumi Darwaza, an extraordinary structure, still stands. And if you will remember what I was telling you about the sort of architecture, the sort of vegetal elements, the three-dimensional stucco decorations, they all exist here in a much more grandiose form, including the figure of the fish, which became a Nawabi symbol par excellence, because they had been given a certain order, the order of the fish. So they use it, almost like a chapa on everything they do, including later on their art and architecture. This is a beautiful image of Asaf-ud-Dawla listening to the Maulvi during Muharram, just to make my point that the Nawab himself was involved in these commemorations, in these rituals. And you can see a very different side to him. The Nawabs are often, disparaged by the Brits as being very fun-seeking, feet, and only thinking of opium and ladies and nach and dana. But you see him that the local artists have painted him in this somber, majestic style, taking part in this important ceremony which is defining his Nawabi. Here I wanted to show you, we often talk about the syncretic nature of this culture, the Ganga Jamni Tehzeeb that comes up around it, and what it means to me, very in particular and in detail, is that really everybody became part of these commemorations, celebrations, rites, and rituals because look at the man on the left. He's a maker of fireworks. Okay, this is in Calcutta, but the same sort of artisans were present in Lucknow and Faizabad. He is making a firework which has the shape of the peacock because for him the peacock is a sacred bird. It is present in all Indian stories. So he will make a figure of the peacock. On the right, you have a procession, a Hindu procession, carrying again a little temple structure, again on a figure of a peacock. Here, if you look at this Muharram procession, there also the Tazia on the left is on a figure of a peacock. So you see there's a lot of exchange between all these people who are taking part in this cultural efflorescence that is happening. They are borrowing from each other. They're taking part in each other's rituals. Nothing is as black and white as sometimes we are given to believe today. Here again, a similar one. Now, this is in Murshidabad, and what is interesting is that while some of the Tazia structures look like maqbaras or tombs, some on the right look like little temples, whereas the one in the far distance just looked like little huts, mud huts. So what happens is that each person would build the Tazia according to their means and to their inclinations. And, if it was a poor person, he would build a little thing made out of bamboo and, maybe paper and shape it like their own mud hut or their little temple and join the procession and immerse it in water like all Hindus do anyway for these kind of things. There was no demarcation in that sense at all. An English writer passing by at this time, Mrs. Mir Hassan, she says that her, Hindu staff would go out and bow before the Tazias passing by, and she said, I think they thought they were temples, So for them, there is no clear distinction between the two. And I wanted to show you in this beautiful image how similar it is to something like the Shiva processions, or those of you who know the Dussehra processions, or the Durga Puja processions, or the Jagannath processions. So this is all part of Indic traditions that everybody is sort of borrowing from each other and making it very much their own. Just as in their own way the Nawabs participated, of course, in Holi, in Diwali, and all the other celebrations that were happening through the year, much to the distress of the British, who thought they would be better employed collecting taxes and handing it over to them. So this is Asafudollah celebrating Holi with all the ladies in his harem. And finally, this last picture to show you, so a genre of painting came out at this time, basically called the terrace paintings, where you see these very idealized terraces of Lucknow and Faizabad, these beautiful places where pristine, beautiful white spaces where all kinds of pleasures and enjoyments are clearly taking place. Though here it's more ladies who seem to be balancing a wine bottle on their heads, and what better way of amusing yourself than doing that? So initially, a lot of art historians used to call these sort of paintings misguided attempts to draw perspective, to draw distance, because as you can see, there is no bird's eye perspective. In fact, if you can see what Faizullah has done, there's one scene going behind the ladies, there's an arch and there's an infinity point over there, whereas behind him there's something else happening. So he has multiple points of perspective, because this is the way that Indian artists think it is correct to show something. They're not interested in realism in the way that Europeans were interested in realism. And one famous art historian has said about what is today considered a great piece of work and a great artist, Faizullah. He has said that European perspective hit him with the force of a custard pie, which is unfortunate considering he has been very much revised, and people like Kavita Singh, the great Indian art historian, has now pointed out that if you see what's happening in the foreground, all these beautiful terraces, it is an idealized view of what the Nawabs are trying to create. Whereas in the distance, I don't know, and on this painting, if you can see on this quality, there's actually a line of soldiers and elephants and marching off to war. And that she believes, and I think she is absolutely correct, that represents Mughal Delhi with all its troublesome wars and all its post-Buxar association, that the Nawabs now want nothing to do at all with that. They want to concentrate their resources and their attention on Awadh, which is the foreground, and build a thing of beauty.
Wonderful. I think we can applaud that. That was wonderful. There are a few more slides after this, which are also lovely, but we'll come to that later. So there's so much to unpack, but I want to begin with the flora and fauna. There's the lion, there's the lily, there's the tiger, and there's the peacock. So let's just talk about each of these, because they symbolize all the powers that were there at the time.
Yeah, they do. Thank you for that. Yes, I was telling somebody the other day that I think the one thing that I fight with my publishers the most about is the title of the book. Now, everything else we agree on very well, and all the editing, it's fine. But we really tussle over the title. And I always want my titles to really mean something, to capture the imagination. And so the lion over here symbolizes the French fleur de lis, because I am trying to bring out the influence of the French in Awadhi affairs, in Hindustani affairs. So, you know, at this time, the lily is the French royal symbol. But while we are talking of the 18th century, of course, after 1789 and the French Revolution, it turns into that rosette, as you know, the bleu blanc rouge, the blue, white, and red rosette. But the lily flower is what some of these soldiers carry as a banner as part of their army. So it's so amusing to imagine that the Nawab is there with his pennants and the Mughal lion and sun and all that, and you have one Frenchman with the fleur de lis in the front. I find it so quirky. So the lily is France, and the lion, as you say, is so powerful actually in Indian history. You have the Mughal lion, because the Mughals had the lion. They had the Kushan lion, I think, on their pennant with the sun. And then you have, so the lion, Imam Ali, who is the, patron saint in a way of the Shias, his symbol was the lion. He had been given the title Lion of God because he fought with so much bravery. So it symbolizes the Shia Nawabs in a way. And then a lot of these degenerate Europeans that we saw also had their own associations with lions. So Claude Martin, was from Lyon, which in French means lion. Yeah, and he wrote that actually on Farhad Baksh, what is called Farhad Baksh today. He had written Chateau de Lyon. So he also clearly played with that word. And Antoine Collier, whom we saw in the beginning, he was given the title Arsalan in Jang, which is lion in battle. And Tipu Sultan, who is a Sher, who uses the symbolism of the tiger so powerfully. In India, Sher can mean lion or tiger. So I thought the lion and the lily was perfect.
And we forgot the fish.
The fish. So we were wondering whether it should be the lion and the fish. Then I thought, okay, no, that is just getting too culinary. I think let's just stick to that. People will think it's a cookbook.
It may as well have been the lion.
It could have been. Yes, absolutely.
But I want to come back to this whole portrayal of Awadh, especially as we have understood in popular literature. And I think Satyajit Ray has a lot to contribute to that. Wajid Ali Shah is this degenerate, effete, of course, lover and patron of the arts, but nothing more. And there's a lovely, you use a lovely phrase, simpering, what is
simpering that? Ineptitude.
Simpering ineptitude or sighing acquiescence. So all the rulers, the Indian rulers at that time are portrayed as sort of just waiting to be saved, as you said, by the British. So this image that we have in popular culture, and Amjad Khan, God bless him, between Gabbar Singh and Wajid Ali Shah, I don't know, what he did to deserve that. But, this, in fact, I was talking to Muzaffar Ali in the morning, and I think he's been also a great source and a friend to Ira, and he talks about this suppression of history that has happened and how people like Ira are slowly sort of uncovering that. So talk about the what we have in the popular imagination and how much it takes to actually tell people what was going on.
No, that's a fantastic question, and it's one that really, I think, troubles me a lot, and which I think about a great deal. And I think we need to come back to the very first thing that you were saying, that in 1947, when the British were leaving India, and in fact, as they left all their colonies in the 40s and the 50s, they began this thing called Operation Legacy. And in Operation Legacy, they started destroying or taking back to England masses and masses of documents. So in Delhi, it was said that there was a huge cloud of smoke in 1947 covering the town of Delhi because they were burning so many documents. In other countries, they actually kind of tied up all the documents, put them in huge cases, and dumped them in the middle of the ocean. Other documents were taken back to England, and the purpose of all of this was so that the indigenous populations would remember the British with fondness and respect. And I think that worked really well, because really almost to this day we do that. And a lot of our interpretations of our own rulers is so tainted by the way in which we have been left in by British accounts. So the Nawabs of Awadh, as you say, they were painted as these effete, fun-loving, kebab eating and naach watching Nawabs, whereas biryani eating.
Wajid Ali Shah.
Correct. Wajid Ali Shah, poor man. I know that's why I stopped way before Wajid Ali Shah. But the reason they did this, they've set out very particularly to do this for a reason. It was because they were destroying these places, right? They were they were continually forcing the Nawabs to hand over more power, to give more money, to fund the wars that I told you about in the beginning, to fund their French wars, Franco-English wars, the revolution, the war against the French Revolution. So because they were doing things that they realized were completely illegal, completely against the moral standing that they were taking, they had to bring down the Nawabs in some way. So they started this program of complete vilification. And I think there's no one, of course, the Nawabs, fell victim to that, despite everything that they achieved. But the one I think who suffered the most, and I have spoken about him a little bit, I don't know if we have a great deal of time, but I'll quickly show you an image which illustrates this, is Tipu Sultan. So Tipu Sultan did the same thing. He had a great program of propaganda. And this image, these are a few close-up of a very famous image which he had painted on the Darya Daulat Khan when he, after the Battle of Polidur, which he and Hyder Ali won against the British in the 1780s, a very famous battle in which they completely defeated the British, and which the British completely covered up, obviously. So it is the most famous battle won by an Indian ruler, which we have never heard about. But Tipu Sultan made these wonderful paintings, and this close-up, you can see that Tipu Sultan himself is on an elephant in the lower right, holding a rose like a true Mughal gent, smelling the roses, while his enemy is there in a palki, which is what women are carried in, and he is running away from the scene of battle. But the process of vilification really can be exemplified in the way in which the British treated Tipu Sultan. So, for example, in the 1790s, after the Third Anglo-Mysore War, they actually took Tipu Sultan's sons hostage. They kidnapped children, and they show it in this style where Cornwallis, the same Cornwallis who had lost the American wars, come, and he is determined to destroy Tipu Sultan for this reason. He is shown in this very kindly, uncular kind of way, taking these children along with it. But imagine the terror of these little boys. Imagine the terror of their parents having to hand over these children, so that they were kind of to make sure that Tipu Sultan paid an enormous war subsidy for what? For having had his own territories conquered by the British. So you see, this process of vilification was very sophisticated at every level, from paintings to the way in which they talked about them in their press. But I wanted to show you that the French sometimes got their own back, and this is the French cartoonist. So he is showing on the right Tipu Sultan, I think urinating, we can safely say, on Lord Cornwallis, who is running away like a coward, leaving his dead soldiers underfoot and rushing off on a mule. And Tipu Sultan is shown as somebody who is enjoying this moment of scaring the British away. So of course every every player tried to show events in their own way, but the British were extremely successful in what they did. They destroyed a lot of the evidence that would help us in, renegotiating our past, and handed to us a version of history which suited the way in which they destroyed one after the other all the kingdoms, the rulers of India.
Children reminds me of another great PR exercise, but by the French this time, Claude Martin, as you talk of. And would you like to explain to people how a person whose name is synonymous with education turns out to be a pretty randy pedophile? So
yes, I'm always a little scared to say this because there are so many Lamartinians.
I spent 2 years in Lamartine, but I think this ought to be told.
Yeah, and so much has been written about Claude Martin. He's probably the most famous Frenchman. Whenever I talk about the French in India, I'm told, oh, there'll be a lot about Claude Martin. I don't know what to tell people. Because, yes, I mean, what I found from, quite openly in the archives is that yes, certainly he was a very rich man because he used to basically loan money to the Nawabs at horrendous rates of 30%, usury. So that was one of the ways he made money, and the arsenal and all sorts of shady ways. So he was a very rich man. He did all kinds of things, certainly fooled around with technology and had a huge collection of paintings and whatnot. But he would also take in young girls, buy young girls, 7, 8, 9 years old, and groom them basically, educate them, give them food, give them a place to live. And then in his memoirs, he would write, in his will really, he said they would end up in my bed as if it was an accident. Somehow they stumbled over and fell into his bed, and became his mistresses, little girls of 11, 12, 13.
It's quite horrendous.
Yeah, it is quite horrendous. Now, we must, of course, understand this was the 18th century. A lot of this happened. A lot of the powerful men did sleep with much younger women, children, by today's definitions. But Claude Martin was a case apart, and even in his own times, the British kind of never really accepted him in their societies because he was considered just a little too shady even for them. So that tells you something.
Absolutely. The other thing, of course, is marvelous women like Bahu Begum. And she also talks about the Begums and then the decline of the princesses and the queens and the rise of the courtesan, which is again, I think, a book that she needs to write. So talk a little about that as well.
Yes, so the Begums really fascinated me. In Lucknow, we have Bahu Begum and Nawab Begum, who are extraordinary women's wife and mother, Shuja-ud-Dawla. And because of what I explained earlier on, because of the treasure that they were able to give Shuja-ud-Dawla, which freed up his lands, Bahu Begum, especially after the death of her husband, was absolutely insistent that she was going to rule Faizabad. So Faizabad was where Shuja-ud-Dawla first settled. And so insistent was she about this that Asaf-ud-Dawla figured that it was safer for him, more prudent, to just shift his capital and rule from Lucknow because there couldn't really be two rulers in the same capital. So that's how powerful she was. And the British, tried their entire life, they tried to put pressure on her to hand over her extraordinary treasure. So she was very wealthy because she came from a Delhi family, and the Mughal emperor at that time had given her wealth in addition. So she came from a very, very wealthy family. And the Governor General Hastings tried very hard to put pressure on her to hand over this treasure, so much so that he was recalled and impeached for his behavior because it was considered ungentlemanly to treat a woman and a woman in Parda in this way. But I think, Bahu Begum was laughing all the way to the bank because she was determined that whatever happened, she would hold on to her treasure. But the problem is, as you were saying, that these Parda-bound women, there was the time had kind of run out on the way in which they could exercise power, because now you had to be out in the open, you had to parley with Sarangi men, you had to be sometimes riding out to battle, you had to be in all kinds of places. So what happened is that you see the rise of courtesans at this time. Right through the 18th century, there are a whole line of courtesans. A lot of the Mughal emperors married courtesans at this time because they were enchanted by them. The women, they married them, and then these courtesans took over power because they knew how to parley with men. They knew how to handle men. They knew how to behave in this new sort of, changing 18th century. And so you slowly see At the end of Babu Begum's life, you can sense, all her powerful courtiers have moved to Lucknow. All the old kind of guard have slowly died out, and she is the last of her kind. And you hear that about very few princesses after this time. It is really the 19th century at the time of the courtesan.
That's right. And also, I think what we need to understand is just as you have what are called tier two towns now, almost derogatory, but the tier two towns like Faizabad and Lucknow were really the rising powers compared to Delhi, which was declining, which was being ransacked. And, you talk of how it was ransacked repeatedly. So, talk a little bit about the rise of Faizabad and then of Lucknow, and what does it mean for us now, in a sense, when we are in a federal country? Really, it's actually the rise of regional powers in a way that's happening now, and it all actually comes from the control of finances, right?
Absolutely. It's the control of finances, the fact that these states, these districts, these subas had stopped sending money back to the center. So they were keeping all the tax revenues, and places like Awadh, the very fertile area, they had to get Gangetic Plains, very famously fertile and rich. So they were keeping, all their money to spend on their cities and their, areas. So that was a huge amount of treasure of money that they were able to use. And if they had the ambition and the impetus, like the Nawabs that we have been talking about did, then they could create something really extraordinary. So, and not only that, all the talent of Mughal Delhi. I mean, because we're talking centuries of traditions. When they see what's happening, they follow the money.
Yeah.
So they start going
out.
Yeah. So they start going to Faizabad, they go to Murshidabad, they go to Hyderabad, they go to Mysore, they go to wherever a ruler is willing to spend money on them. And they say that the lamp of Lucknow was lit by Delhi, because all the poets, all the dancers, all the courtesans, the cooks even, point of contention. Even today, I daren't say too much. But all the talent of Delhi comes to whoever will patronize them. The Nawab, the elite, the ladies, they're spending money because you can imagine, like, a newly built city. The parvenus, the nouveau riche, let us say.
Yeah.
You are quickly spending money to build your culture, to create a culture. So they were spending money on all these things. And sadly, this is what the British first started cutting back on. When I first heard the phrase, the British wanted Asif-ud-Daula to cut back on his household expense, I was like, okay, fair enough. Maybe he was spending too much on, I don't know, something trite in his house. No, but what they mean is like an entire genre of singing and dancing, for example. He was made to, to send away his singing and dancing troops. That means an entire way of life.
Right.
Where will these singers and dancers go? That means this disappears. So the household expenses that they keep trying to get him to cut back on means that there's less money for these beautiful things that they have created, right? So really important to remember that and to try and see how we can, like we were talking before the started, Faizabad is extraordinary, and it is in such a state of neglect and dereliction that it breaks the heart to go and see Babu Begum's capital. We should make it part of the tourist map. There's so much to see.
Right, exactly. And before it's lost, and it's destroyed, and then of course everyone will say it never existed.
Correct.
But when you talk about that, it also reminds me of what Farah and Amrit were talking about, Begum Akhtar, and how now a new Lucknow tries to give her a little space, which, if I'm not mistaken, Madhvi Kukreja has sort of created that little space for her, and she has an annual festival there. A woman who was so synonymous with a city can't find even a little space in Lucknow, where she was such a star.
That's right. But that started in the 19th century with the British, with their laws against sexual morality, and the courtesans suddenly were transformed overnight, from these very cultured and sought after women entertainers into prostitutes. And really that spelled the beginning of the end. And then with the rise of nationalism, then even the middle classes turned their backs on that sort of culture.
Right. Now, we were also talking about how your possible next book could be the leading up to the first War of Independence, as we call it, 1857.
Yeah.
So there's so much here that is telling you how these new centers of power are emerging and how, in a way, they come together and they fight the East India Company.
Yeah.
So talk a bit about that.
Well, I'll just, because I think we're running out of time.
Yeah, we have a few questions from the audience as well.
So I'll just make a quick point that's important to remember. I think there's several things about the 18th century that we need to remember. One was that, we were not waiting for the British to come and save us, and it wasn't all, state of complete decrepitude. The second thing is that there was resistance to British incursion from day one.
Right.
And we really forget that. The Adivasis were fighting against the land resettlement rights. All kinds of people were rising up. There were insurrections everywhere. And if you read The Lion and the Lady, you'll see that people like Raja Chain Singh, the Begums, there was insurrection all the time. So there was resistance to this taking over, to these changing of ways from day one. And it is absolutely no surprise that 1857 happened. It's just surprising maybe it didn't happen earlier. Because people all over the country at various times were rising really violently against a company who had come in and were changing their way of life completely. So I think it's really, really important to kind of renegotiate our past in light of what we know, and examine these forms of resistance which have existed and give them their due today.
Yeah, the hidden histories that you're a master of. Questions from the audience?
It's really enlightening to hear you, and I have no idea of history since I'm a scientific person.
Oh, by the way, so is she. She was trained as a
long time ago.
Yeah, microbiologist, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm a doctor, and now my question is that I've been to Lucknow many times, and the material used for constructing the Imambaras, the state, the light on the state, and all these Puranan and Jaggery was. Is it really true? And what was the condition of the people? There were insurrections, there were British, and they were not girls of identities and reconstruction. I mean, what were the people eating? And with the so this is always, if that's what I mean, I think I'm the right person today to ask this question.
So yes, the stucco material is a mix of all these kind of things. So almost like a kebab recipe, it's like it's mysterious, and there's always a secret ingredient that I don't tell you. So there's all kinds of.
So what kind of research has been done?
No, there is. There is. Yeah. But to come to your question about what people were eating, was that at least at the time of Asafudollah till where my book ends, 1803, until the British take over, the land is very well run. We are told by many sources that people are relatively happy, they are relatively prosperous, they are well run. So the managers who are put in charge of the land revenue in the various talukas, they are really careful about how they generate their taxes, and they are not what we envisage, these absolutely despotic, nasty men. That was the British. That was what they were doing in Bengal in the 1770s, which caused the Great Bengal Famine of 1772. That's what they were doing, gathering tax at the end of a sword. The Nawabs weren't doing this. Even the British travelers admit that actually the land is very prosperous looking, the people look happy, look well fed. So I think there was enough urad dal to go into the crushing of the stuff.
Not as I have been visiting, these museums also, but not a single painting depicts and what was the condition of the people. You see other places, go to Calcutta, there are many painters, I don't remember the painters now, but to see the condition of the people, they just show the palaces and the war. There is something lacking. It always puts a question at the back of my mind.
I know. I think in most elite paintings, they do tend to focus on those who are paying you the money. Because it costs a lot of money to produce the kind of paintings I showed you. It takes months. It takes expensive materials. Some of these materials are gold. Some are lapis lazuli. pensive business. Several painters are involved. One will paint the portrait, one will paint the animal, one will paint the flowers. So it's not something that you're going to spend your money on painting the common man. Unless the common man makes money one day and starts to patronize. But most of the ateliers were run by elite men or women.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, please. Amit.
Just to answer the question, actually, Mapara was made by the people at the day during the big right, and so they just give them
Employment.
They were looked after. Not exactly, but that's my question. That's what I'm asking. It's not a question. It's actually, I think historians have a huge responsibility.
Yeah.
Because they put their lips to things which sometimes people read a lot of books to find the right conclusion. For example, I read Shiva Sen's Broken Threads just to find the Indian partition perspective from the Pakistan side. And they make Nehru and villains, Gandhi and Jinnah the heroes.
Correct.
In that. And there will be some truth in some way. So when you say Claude Martin was a pedophile, I get a little worried.
Kaveri said it.
I hope it's not in the book.
Sorry.
Because
It's not in the book.
No, she's written it in a very euphemistic way. Shall
I'm
we
very
say?
scared of that.
because morality changes with the
It
time.
does.
Like,
It does.
That's what she said, yeah.
It does.
when you say call him a pedophile, you actually
I don't.
No, that was me, please. Let us not set the culture police on her.
Not at
please.
all. And
That's all we need.
I need.
Spiritual school and all.
I also studied in the school, but we can see through what it is.
But nobody, even today, Quorum, Martin, Quorum,
Yeah.
looked after, like the Tata office. Because even today, people who work for him are eligible because they have they were
Bequeathed.
stuff in his will, which are holding them in good standing to be a part of the key schools that it's Calcutta.
But the school that he set up, he ensured that they would always
Sing his
praises. So I wonder if it's as much he was worried about his posthumous fame as maybe worried.
He was
about
also
his
building his legacy with
He was.
burning documents in his own way.
So like
Yeah.
we are machinery with those things.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In its own way.
I think this gentleman.
Yeah, please. Could we have him?
I want to know your Hi, Rashi. I want to know your perspective on what was the relationship between the Mughal court and Awadh? Because one always hears that Pastor or like the Lucknow was the embers of the Mughal
Yeah.
Yeah.
Empire.
No,
Like,
that's
were
right.
they different? Like, were they building the same thing?
Yeah.
Or was there like intermarriage? What was the relation?
So, there was definitely a crossover because at that time, everyone was an inheritor of the Mughal legacy. Okay, so that was the way in which you demonstrated power. That was the way in which you could be a king. So you can see so many similarities, right? If you compare the Nawabs and some of what their images look like, it looks a lot like, whether the parasol holders at the back, and so much of the paraphernalia of royalty is similar to the Mughal ones. But by this time, the Awadhis and Awadh had definitely become a place of refuge for Mughal India. So all the Mughal princes were coming to Awadh to get protection from the Nawab, to get a pension from him. So Asaf-ud-Daula was paying a bunch of princes to stay, in safety and in comfort in Lucknow, because they had been chased out. They were too scared to remain in Mughal Delhi at that time, between the Marathas and the Prince and the Jats and the Rohilas, because everybody was struggling around that area. So I think, despite the fact that they were Asaf-ud-Daula even was very keen to get the title of Wazir, because it symbolized something. Nawab Wazir of the empire, right? He wanted to get that the cloak. of honor. So all these, the accoutrements of royalty, he was keen to hold on to. But they created something entirely different. And by this stage, they were the ones giving patronage and giving, safety to the Mughals. And these princes continued to live for a long time in Lucknow, writing quite cheeky poetry about the Nawabs at the same time, which the Nawab had to shove off. Definitely the axis of power had tilted towards these districts and these subas.
But did the Nawabs consider themselves?
No, they consider themselves quite separate. I think especially in the elaboration of their Shia culture. I didn't come across much marriage. They would have been with not the immediate family, maybe they organized weddings between others, but not themselves. But there was close connection. There were letters written back and forth, especially between the Zenanas. So the Awadhi Zenana was in close contact, and also politics was happening between the Zenanas. The Mughal Zenana, because Nawab Begum was from the Mughal Zenana, she had close connection. So they were kind of working behind the scenes like that.
How fascinating it must be.
Yeah, completely.
How are the letters carried?
Well, if you must know, the Harkara had so the Harkaras were the system of communication. The way it was extraordinary how information travels the country. So you had a runner. The runner was trained from the age of 6 or 7 by putting kind of steel plates on his ankles and made to kind of run like that on the spot. And little by little he developed. He became a very fast runner. So the Nawabs of Awadh especially had 20,000 Harkaras apparently. And they got information from as far as Kabul. And where have I come to? Okay,
No, but
so how he would have gone to Mughal Delhi would be to have tied, especially if it was a secret kind of communication, they would tie the paper up in a small roll, tucked it behind the ear, so that it was here invisible, covered it with his hair, and he would run. And
how long would it take, I wonder?
I know I've written it in the book somewhere. It's a footnote. I think I don't want to make a mistake, but it took something like 2 weeks from Kabul or something like running all the way.
Wow.
Not the same man. You had posts.
Acha, it was like a
Dark post.
like a relay race. How fascinating. I mean, I wonder when you're researching all this, Ira, you come across something
I get so distracted, I can't tell you. I don't know how I finished my book, but I get so distracted.
Yeah, because there must be stuff that you want to go deeper and deeper into, and then
I can't tell
it's
you
a black hole.
How deep I've got into some of the subject matter defies anybody's logic.
But it's amazing. I find it fascinating. Please, yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think we can all applaud that.
Thank you.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So on this very note, which Kaveri Bamzai was saying, so I just want to thank Ira ma'am for doing such profound research, because it's like Dr. Kaveri was saying, I mean, I'm not a history, but yeah, when I was in school, I did study a little sincerely. But to be honest, this part of history, it was like you said, just so complex, so much was happening. And I think it's a very daunting task to kind of retell history. So to know from you everything that's happening behind the scenes, and the beauty of this research, the complexity that you've captured, I really admire.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
That's very kind of you. Thank you.
That's why we're so privileged to talk to you. Any other question, or shall we call it a day?
I also think she's done a great job by focusing on certain things.
Yeah.
It's the problem with William's books on the East India Company.
Yeah.
It's like all over the place.
Thank you. Actually, that was a very big point.
Yeah.
Because initially I was going to write about the French in India. Just that, the French in India. That's
Which
what
I
my
should
publisher wanted.
explain also happens to be in your DNA. I think people may not know.
That's true. My mother was French, so I do speak and read French, which made it a little easier.
You should, but like 1 second.
was so spot on, right?
Choose and
Well, so at last I have an advantage, because I can't read Persian. That's always been a bugbear. But I wanted to write about the French, but then I started researching and found all this material, and I thought it would be much easier if I focus on an Indian region. Firstly, because I really want to write Indian history from the point of view of the Indians, and Awadh just exemplified, it's a microcosm of everything that's happening. And I can use it because I don't like telling history in a scholarly, boring manner, chapter by chapter. I want people to feel implicated, and you can feel implicated if you know the people. So if you get to know the Nawabs and the Begums, fall in love with them up with their mustaches, and then, so then you understand, then it makes sense. So that's what thank you for your question, because I thought a lot about how I would write about the French influence. And so the Nawabs allowed me to do that.
She has exquisite descriptions of Shuja-ud-Dowla, including his clothes and how sort of see-through and transparent they were. So please draw your own conclusions from. I'm sure he must be coming to you in your dreams.
You must remember that even the ladies.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're all of them, yes.
Can start half an hour.
Yeah.
The
Yes.
they talk
Correct.
Yeah.
No, it's
exciting.
correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The paintings are marvelous.
So does he come to you in your dreams? Or his
What
mustache?
would my husband say if I admit to that?
But love. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, one last, yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you.
My question is, thought in our cultural distortion is that on one point we say what is logically called way, which the answer is a treatment of the people. And on the other hand, we say any way can go from a lot of things that the way British kind of point of view with women is that when we talk about partisans,
Yeah.
we talk about they reduce them to the status of
Prostitutes, yeah.
or does it never
No.
reduce to that? So do you think there was a sort of deliberate cultural discussion which happened in the right one?
By the British, do you mean particularly at the time of the impeachment trial, Hastings impeachment trial?
Overall,
Yeah, for 100%. All of the British attitude towards the Begums, towards people like the eunuchs, because some very important players at this time were the chief eunuchs, the Khwaja Sarads, because they occupied that liminal space between the Zenana and the outside world. How would the Begums negotiate the outside world? They couldn't physically go, so they had these eunuchs who were. The Indians talk about them so differently. They talk about them as majestic, sober men who were very rich, who had a lot of presence, who had an entourage. They were serious men. And the British was so, they were so uncomfortable in the presence of these eunuchs, and they talk about them in effeminate terms, which was not at all the case. So the Brits struggled to deal with women and eunuchs, and their attitude towards the women. So it would change from either. So when Bahu Begum was trying to articulate her ambitions, they were saying to each other, writing letters saying, I can hardly believe in a country in which women are required to remain in Parda, this woman dares to wish to appoint her own ministers. Little knowing that in this country, women are jolly well ruling all kinds of things, right? But it suits them, and it is their point of view, because in 18th century Britain, a woman was first her father's property. When she married her husband, she was her husband's property, and she handed over her money to the husband, whereas Bahu Begum was holding on to her property. So the Brits were very much, influenced by their own attitudes towards women. They have very strong patriarchal attitudes, which unfortunately in the 19th century, with evangelical Protestantism, became even more pronounced, and unfortunately more still, we sort of then adopted.
Right.
Okay, that's a comment. That's a comment. Even if they were taught on the natural side, that does not justify and take away from the respect that on the natural side, right? This party explains maybe the Claude Martin.
You had a question?
I had a very small question. Yeah, thank you. The very small question is that French factories of what?
So they were called factories. They were trading centers. So Pondicherry, Chandanagar, they were all called factories.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank
It's a
you.
wonderful
Thank you,
audience.
Kaveri, for taking the time.
No,
and
not
for
at all.
the
I love the book,
conversation.
and thank you so much for this as well. I think this was an exquisite
Okay. Let me leave you.
presentation.
Let me leave you with the last picture.
Yes.
Okay, this I just wanted to show you.
That's a nice one, no?
Let us not forget, France once had this. So you can see that this is a painting done by a French cartoonist called Antoine Borel, and he has shown Hyder Ali, whom they thought a great deal of, spanking a British man. His pink bottom is absolutely scarlet. And it's written that the French man at the back, the French East India Company man, is providing the sticks for the beating.
Well done. This is the history we need to know. Thank you so much. Thank you.